I'll just let you know. I don't know everything.
That sounds amazing. And
Um,
just for those who want to know, if you hit the chat button, people can, if they don't want to talk, message you, and then we can see it, and I can always read those out to you as well.
okay.
And I
Yeah,
am recording this for those who are wondering.
okay, that would be great. So the way I like to talk is I always like to start with the principles of health, 8 natural laws of health. And they are not only prevention, they're also treatment. And I'm going to be talking about some of these. I'm going to highlight a few of them this evening. I think you probably already know them. They're in an acronym called New Start: nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, and trust. And we'll talk more about trust at the end. New Start. So let's talk about COVID-19. COVID-19 is an interesting infection. It's actually in the coronavirus family, which is coronaviruses make up about 40% of all colds. And just a really quick thing to kind of tell you where we're going. When was the last time you read about a cold vaccine, where people are actually going to get a vaccine so they don't get colds anymore? The answer is, yeah, we don't have one, and I'm not sure we ever will. It's a challenging virus to vaccine against. And I'm not a prophet, but I suspect that the good talk about a vaccine in the future, in the near future, is hopeful. Am I holding my breath that it's going to work? No, I'm not. I hope it does, because obviously our lives would change and we can get back to some sort of semblance of normal, but I'm not terribly sure it's going to happen. What we're all looking forward to is herd immunity. I'm sure you've all heard about that. And herd immunity comes essentially 2 ways. Either enough people get the infection that the infection can't find a new host. And for this virus, it's probably close to about 65 or 70% of the population get that infection. Or we come up with a vaccine. And like I said, hopefully we'll have a vaccine. But this talk is really about, okay, what happens if we don't have a vaccine? Or what do we do until we get a vaccine, okay? Now, it has interesting parts to it. You've probably heard a little bit about this, where you have an early phase and a late phase of the infection. The early phase of the infection infects a whole lot more people, obviously, than the late phase, because probably about 80%, maybe even higher, don't get all that sick. Now, the fatality rate is really, or the case fatality rate, is probably not all that high. And fortunately, it looks like it's lower than it used to be. But still, there's a fair number of people getting sick. Cold weather is how do we handle this until we are either enough of us have got immunized or sick. Now, about going back to this early and late phase, the early phase is essentially when it's relatively mild, and we don't have any treatments for that in terms of pharmacotherapy. We don't have a pill, we don't have a shot, we don't have a potion that's being marketed anyway, that somebody can take and prevent them from getting sick enough to actually be in the hospital. Now, there are 3 medications that have been okayed for treatment in the late phase. The late phase is when you're really sick into the hospital. And that is remdesivir. I'm sure you use the same name in Canada. I looked that up earlier today. The generic is the same, the trade name is different. Remdesivir. There's also steroids, dexamethasone, and convalescent plasma. Now, convalescent plasma is basically taking antibodies from somebody who has already had the disease and giving it to the person who is now sick. And generally speaking, these treatments, remdesivir, steroids, and convalescent plasma are given for the sickest people. That is to say, people who are already on oxygen or intubated on a ventilator. Now, what we're finding is in the late phase, the steroids of the three have been the most beneficial. Now, let's pause for a second here. Early in the phase, in a normal immune response, you have a lot of inflammation and you have what's called cytokine release. Now, I don't know if you've heard about the word cytokine. There's lots of cytokines in our body. These are inflammatory markers. One of the most common one, and I'm sure you might have heard of it, is called interferon alpha. Okay, there's different phases. There's a 1 and a 2. Let's just say interferon. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Now, in a normal response, when your body senses that you've been attacked, your interferon levels go up. Okay, and it's sort of like getting the message out to the body. All right, we're under attack, and we're going to rally the troops. And our immune system is very complicated. We could go on and do Zooms until kingdom comes and not get to the bottom of our immune system. Super complicated stuff. But if you think about it, there's two parts to it. There's what's called the innate immune system and the acquired system. Now, the innate system is sort of what we're born with, okay? And the acquired is like the antibodies that we get after we've been exposed either through sickness or through vaccine, okay? So you can imagine a child's immune system is pretty robust. They'll get a very high fever with the same bug that you and I will get. They will generate a temperature of 41, 42 degrees, and we'll generate a temperature of maybe 38.5 or 40 degrees. I'm sure you've seen that. And if you have grandchildren, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You get the cough, you get the sniffle, you don't feel very good. Maybe your temperature is 38 at the most, and the little one has a temperature of 40 or 41 even. Sometimes it's very impressive, okay? What's the difference? The difference is there an innate immune system, okay, is far more robust than ours. As we age, unfortunately, our innate immune system deteriorates. The difference is that we've seen lots of infections during our time, and or we've been vaccinated a lot of time. So our acquired immune system is pretty strong, okay, relative to the little one. Now, we've already said we don't really have antibodies to this infection yet, right? And so our acquired immune system is essentially not helpful in this infection until we have more disease or until we have vaccine. Our acquired immune system is really not doing much. Does that sort of make sense? So the most important part is our innate immune system. And that's the part that we're going to be talking about most, okay? Now, back to the medications. The three medications, the remdesivir, the dexamethasone, and the convalescent plasma. Convalescent plasma, by the way, is getting antibodies from somebody who's already had the sickness, right? So it's technically not a medication. It's just the antibodies that we receive. Interesting data. Remdesivir, there was a brand, at the very beginning, there was a study called ACT trial. I don't know, you might have heard about this in the news. It looked like it was actually pretty beneficial, and that's when people started getting this medication. There's a new trial released by the World Health Organization that shows it's of no benefit. So that's not very good news. The convalescent plasma, there was a very large study released from India recently that showed that there was no benefit. And that's kind of odd because you would think, you know, if person A had COVID, developed antibodies, and then person B gets sick and receives the antibodies from person A, surely they're going to do better. I mean, that's just kind of logical, right? But in fact, it doesn't look like that's happening. Part of the confounding issue here is that when you receive somebody else's antibodies, you might also receive their coagulation factors, and the coagulation factors might interfere with clotting. And as you probably know, one of the big problems with this infection is that you get an awful lot of microemboli or small clots, especially in the lungs. And that interferes with oxygenation. And that's why these people have such low oxygen levels, but are having conversations like we do. Instead of having saturations of 95, 96, 97%, maybe they're 85%, but they don't feel as bad as, say, somebody who would normally have an oxygen saturation of 85%. If one of you were to volunteer to be in have a bag over your head and we could drop your sats to 85%, by the time you get to 85%, you'd be saying, can I get out, please? That's because right now your lungs are normal, but with this infection, you get low numbers and you don't even feel bad. Okay, let's go back to the innate immune system, that thing that the young people have, and as we go, we have less of. There are things that we can do to make that stronger. Now let's go back to our NEWSTART. Okay, let's see if we could figure out which ones are of the most benefit. Now, if I were to say nutrition is critical, I don't think anybody would argue with me. In fact, I think you all know that if you get a cold, if you get a flu, we intrinsically know what foods to eat and what foods to ignore, right? Are we going to go out and have ice cream cones and candy with a cold? Absolutely not. We know that's just not going to work. And in this case, it doesn't work either. In fact, the higher our simple sugar content is in our food, the less adequate our innate immune system can work, okay? So that's a direct correlation. You want to really cut out the simple sugars out of your diet if you're in the early stages of getting this condition. What do you eat? It's easy. Probably the things that we've been talking about a long time now. Rebecca probably has told you 500 times that we need to eat plants, we need to eat plants, and we need to eat more plants. Is that right, Rebecca? Yes, she's smiling. So the less processed, the better, right? The less processed, the better. And when we're really sick, and you all know this, when we get the flu, how hungry are we? We're not very hungry. In fact, we have anorexia, which says, I don't want anything to eat, right? Now, we tend to get pretty thirsty because, of course, we're sweating and we're losing all this fluid. So that's critically important. So lots of water and simple diet. And you don't need a lot. You need a fairly simple amount. Exercise. Is it a good idea to get a fair amount of exercise when you get sick like this? Perhaps you've heard this before. Can I go for a run? Rebecca's a runner. Can I go for a run if I have a fever? And the thinking is, no, wait until the fever is actually dropped down before you actually even go out for exercise, even for a walk, for example, okay? It's probably not a great idea to try to focus on exercise in a time like this. We already talked about water. The normal adult needs somewhere around 60, I'm doing the conversion in my head, Rebecca. We need about 2 liters of water a day. And if it's hot and we're sweating, or if we have a fever and we're losing a lot of water, we need to replenish what we lose. And you'd be surprised if you have a high fever. I'm sure some of you have experienced this. You wet the sheets, you wet the bed. I mean, my goodness. You feel like somebody just poured a whole bunch of water on top of you. Probably the easiest way to figure out how much to drink is, if I go to the bathroom, is my urine dark? If it is, I need to drink some more. I should actually be able to hold it up to the light if it were in a glass, and I should be able to see light through it. It needs to be quite light, either white or yellow. Sunlight. Vitamin D is critically important to immune function, specifically the innate immune response. Now, I looked up some data for Canada, as a matter of fact, and this is a website that was a government website. They were talking about goals. Now, the units would be nanomoles per liter. I'm sure this is something we all talk about. We all talk in that kind of language, right? Nanomoles per liter. But just remember the numbers. We try to get 50 or 60. Now, if you're living south of the equator or on the equator, that's not so hard. But where we live, or even you all are north of where we are, it's kind of challenging. In the summertime, about 25% of Canadians don't get enough vitamin D. Okay. In the wintertime, it's closer to 40%, roughly half. Okay. Now, there are different ways to get vitamin D. As one, you could go outside, or two, you can ingest it in your food. I think it's always a great idea to go on vacation, maybe go to Hawaii or Mexico during the middle of the winter. That's a good idea, you know? So maybe if the Canadian government can send everybody south, I don't know, Puerto Vallarta maybe, there you go. We got some votes for that. That is a great way to get vitamin D. And how much do you need? If the sun is high, not like it is now where we have, you know, very weak sun, but if the sun is high like it would be, say, in the summertime, between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, you need at least 20 minutes, okay? And that's to say short sleeve and like short pants, okay? You can absorb it in your head, your arms, your legs, okay? That's the best way to get vitamin D. You don't need to go outside and bake and bake and bake, obviously. Now, the darker a person's skin, that is to say the more melanin they have in their skin, they need less. I'm sorry, turn that around. They need more because they're going to be absorbing less. So the longer you stay in Mexico and the darker you get, you might have to stay out for another 25 minutes, which that would be just awful, wouldn't it, in the warm sun. That's one way. The other way to do it, of course, is to get it in your food. The website is specifically talking about milk because, of course, which is regular sized glass of milk. Personally, I don't consume milk, and so I get that in a tablet. And this time of year, I would take about 2,000 international units, and that works for Canada too. 2,000 international units a day. If you're low, you might have to take 3,000 or 4,000 to catch up. It's best not to take too much, however, because vitamin D can build up in your system and it can be toxic. Okay, so it's best to visit your physician and get a drug level from time to time. Let's see, that's when I'm talking about different things you can think of. I don't want, if I'm choosing for myself, I do not